Good evening, it's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore. You're watching The Big Story with Dylan Ang. I'm Haryanto Diman coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Coming up on the show, we have Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh discussing the political struggles faced by Malaysia Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin and a food delivery rider's mission to raise funds for charity. Now, before we begin, if you're watching us on YouTube and haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit the red subscribe button below.
The Health Ministry has confirmed 768 new COVID-19 cases as of noon today. 10 of the new cases are Singaporeans and permanent residents. Migrant workers living in dormitories continue to make up the bulk of the remaining cases.
The full breakdown of the new cases will be released later today. Singapore now has a total of 21,707 cases. Moving on, Singapore Airlines expects to make a full-year net loss for the first time in its history. The SIA Group said in a Singapore Exchange update today that the forecast is despite strong results in the first 9 months of the financial year that ended in March. This loss is in part due to the collapse of fuel prices in March, which led to fuel hedging losses.
SIA Group added a small operating profit that is still expected for the full year. Operating cash flows are expected to remain negative in the April to June quarter. The full result of the year will be announced on May 14th.
The aviation and tourism industry continues to be one of the hardest hit by the COVID-19 crisis. The nosedive in the demand for air travel has forced many carriers to ground most of their fleet. The timing and trajectory of any recovery from the crisis for the industry remain uncertain. To discuss further this unprecedented impact on the aviation industry, we have aviation expert Brendan Sobie. Hi Brendan. Now Brendan, SIA first full year net loss in its history. How significant is this?
Yeah, it is significant, as SIA has never had a loss and would have liked, obviously, to continue this incredible streak of profits. But it was inevitable once this crisis of unprecedented proportions started in March. It was inevitable that SIA's streak would not be able to continue. With it, grounded almost all its airplanes and has been flying only 4% of its normal capacity since late March. And the question was really just when would the first loss occur? Initially, it seemed like they wouldn't have a loss maybe for the year ending March 2020 due to the fact that they had profits the first 3 quarters, and they still will have an operating profit for the full year despite the loss in the last couple of months of the fiscal year. However, what's happened from a net basis is they've had to recognize this fuel hedging overhedge situation, which means basically they're locked into acquiring too much fuel at a previous high price for the next fiscal year, this current fiscal year. And the way accounting standards work, they need to recognize at least part of this loss in the previous year, the year they're going to report results for next week. So what that means is they're going to have a net loss for the fiscal year ending March 2020, and they'll have another net loss again in the year ending March 2021, as well as an operating loss. So they will have an operating loss in the new fiscal year as well. So the news basically is that they've had to recognize some of this loss earlier, and the streak ends now rather than say later on. But it was inevitable that the streak would end. Given the situation. It's the worst crisis ever for Singapore Airlines. It's the worst crisis ever for the industry overall. So no surprise that you can't continue a profit streak given this situation.
Now, Brendan, fuel prices collapsed earlier in March. What kind of an impact did it have on the aviation industry's worsening financial situation?
I mean, the fuel prices, exacerbates the situation for those airlines that are hedged, including Singapore Airlines. For those airlines that are not hedged, like the Chinese airlines, for example, there's some reprieve because they're buying on spot prices and they have much lower fuel costs now. And Chinese airlines, for example, their capacity is recovering more than, say, airlines in other markets, because the domestic Chinese market is starting to recover, still down over 50%, but it is in a better position now than most other markets in the world. So the fuel situation varies by carrier, but really, I mean, the big situation here is that what the overall COVID-19 situation is doing for the global airline industry, which is basically means that it has reduced demand to almost zero when it comes to international travel, and most domestic markets, a lot of them are still closed or are very small at the moment as well. So, and it's created this demand environment that is so off the charts bad. I mean, it's nobody would have imagined something like this ever happening, and it's not only happening, but it's happening over quite a long period of time. It's been a couple months already, and it's going to continue for, in some cases, for several months in terms of significant reduction in international demand, down 90+%, but really for a few years, but before there's a full recovery. So the fuel prices, if there's no demand, the low fuel prices don't mean anything, because you're not flying and you're not really using the fuel anyway.
Yeah. Brendan, we want to focus now on the airlines and the recovery for airlines. Now, what steps have airlines taken to help ease the financial strain brought upon by the pandemic?
I mean, airlines have made several measures, cut costs, and they have also, asked the government for help. So that's really the main area of relief, but it varies from country to country and from airline to airline. So Singapore is very fortunate that they have a very supportive government. They're covering most wages for their employees for at least 6 months, maybe longer, depending on how long this crisis lasts. And they have, Temasek, which is the government investment arm. They are supporting this rights issue that is bolstering liquidity. So what the airlines need to do, not only here in Singapore but everywhere, is to kind of improve liquidity and cut costs as much as possible in order to survive the storm. And then hopefully, once things get back to normal in a couple of years, then they'll still be in place, and have the ability to respond to the demand and recover. Because without government support and without taking these proactive measures in the interim, they honestly won't be there when the demand does recover.
Now let's shift our attention to the tourism sector for a moment. Now, both the aviation as well as the tourism sector are, of course, interlinked. Both sectors have seen a significant decline. Reports are now saying that airfares may increase if carriers are expected to maintain social distancing measures on flights. In the Asia-Pacific region, the International Air Transport Association thinks it could be as high as a 54% increase. What do you make of this?
I mean, it's really too early to tell because we don't know what measures will be implemented on a global level. Right now, we're seeing, some countries where you have, the blocked middle seat. Other countries, they don't have it. But there's the beginning of a discussion already at the international level to try to harmonize the standards and create something that makes sense. Because IATA has come out and, of course, said that blocked middle seat doesn't necessarily help, and they're advocating things like masks and other measures like at the airport because nobody really knows. There's not much research has been done, and there's just a lot of talk, but nobody really has answers yet. So we have to wait to see where this all goes. Airplanes are generally pretty safe environment. They have filters like you would only see in a hospital. If you blocking the middle seat, doesn't necessarily reduce the risk by 100%, because you still would be passing passengers in the aisles and on the way to the toilets and so forth. So what is an acceptable risk, and that has to be determined. In terms of the impact on airfare, that's not really. Airfare is a supply and demand thing, and right now you have all these airplanes that are grounded, all these workers that are not working, and the airlines will want to get these planes back in the air and these workers working when there's demand, or at least some demand, but the situation, at least initially, I think, will be that the airfares actually will be very low, because there'll be some reluctance to fly because of situation. The virus will still be out there to some extent. People might prefer to drive or take trains rather than fly, and so airlines will have to stimulate the market, and they'll want the cash to come in, because they're in a cash poor situation in these months. So they're going to want to stimulate demand, get the cash coming in, and people and as many planes as possible in the air that are now grounded. So that's going to be the driver, not necessarily some of these other issues. So I don't necessarily think airfares will increase in the short term because of that. And in the long term, we have to see what happens. Eventually, there might be a vaccination. Eventually, there might be testing for everybody before they board an airplane, which might be cheaper than blocking the middle seat. So it's really too early to tell, in the long term, what will happen with airfares, I would say. But in the short term, actually, I expect a lot of promotions and pressure on airfares to come down, actually.
Right.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Brendan, for your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
We've been speaking to aviation expert Brendan Sobie about the latest with regard to the worrying immediate aviation climate. Still at home, the volume of Housing Board resale flats plummeted by 78.3% in April from March to a level that observers say could be a historical low. Only 423 flats changed hands last month. Prices also fell, declining by 1.5% for 3-room HDB flats, 0.2% for 4-room flats, and 1.8% for executive flats. Prices for 5-room flats bucked the trend by rising 0.2%. Overall, resale prices in April were 0.04% lower than in March.
A 17-year-old youth who is allegedly linked to a video of a boy sampling drinks at an NTUC FairPrice supermarket before placing them back on a shelf has intended to plead guilty to one count of being a public nuisance. Nigel Pang Yu-ming told a district court today that he will not be engaging a lawyer. He is now out on bail of $3,000 and is expected to plead guilty on May 22nd.
Mustafa Centre has reopened its doors about a month after it was identified as a COVID-19 cluster. The reopening comes with additional safety measures in place, which include having customers submit their personal details via digital check-in system, Safe Entry, as well as do a thermal scan. All entrances are also controlled with 1 entry point and 2 exit points for the whole mall. Only the supermarket section, however, is allowed to open.
Let's take a look at what's making headlines around the world. South Korea is bracing for an inevitable second wave of coronavirus infections, given the scale of the pandemic. This as the nation eases social distancing measures amid a slowdown in new infections. Among the 4 new cases reported yesterday, only 1 is a case of local infection. Health officials said they will be better placed to combat the virus the next time around, given their success so far.
The World Health Organization said that recovered coronavirus patients who later test positive have not been reinfected, while simply still expelling dead lung cells. Research has shown that many build up antibodies a week or so after infection or the onset of symptoms. Expelling dead lung cells is a part of their recovery phase. Experts say that it is, however, still unclear if the body is able to build up enough immunity to ward off a new attack by the virus, or if it does, how long such immunity lasts.
It's back to business for the sport industry, with the Ultimate Fighting Championship holding its UFC 249 event tomorrow in Jacksonville, Florida. While many major sporting events like the 2020 Tokyo Olympics have come to a halt, UFC will hold the distinction of becoming the first major sport entity to resume holding events with UFC 249. Now, it's the first of 3 events scheduled to take place over 7 days, all held behind closed doors. Now, also in the news, a gas leak at the LG chemical plant in India has killed at least 11 and sickened hundreds more. The toxic gas had leaked out of 2 5,000-ton tanks that had been unattended due to India's coronavirus lockdown, which has been in place since late March. Officials have widened the evacuation zone as a precautionary measure. An estimated 10,000 people are within the affected area of the leak.
Malaysia's parliament will allow a vote of no confidence in Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, moved by his predecessor Mahathir Mohamad. Despite this, it's unlikely that it will be held in the upcoming one-day parliament sitting on May 18. Speaker Arif Yusof said today the motion was in accordance with regulations. Separately, yesterday he had rejected a confidence vote in Tun Mahathir as unconstitutional.
Now let's have Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh in on the discussion. Shannon, it's now a go for the motion filed by Tun Mahathir against PM Muhyiddin. What's next? What is going to happen to PM Muhyiddin?
Well, I think we have to take the news while it's very sexy and exciting with a pinch of salt. What all that means is that the Speaker has looked at the motion, he finds that there's nothing irregular in it, and it can be tabled in Parliament. Now, whether it will see the light of the day is another question, because it doesn't mean that it goes straight to the top of the order paper. The first thing that happens when Parliament reconvenes on May 18 is that we will have to listen to the King's opening speech for the year. And then we will debate government bills. Obviously, they have to pass a supplementary supply bill for the stimulus package. That's 35 billion ringgit that needs to be approved. So when will we see this confidence motion? Unfortunately, no one can tell. And if I were Muhyiddin, I wouldn't be too alarmed yet at this point.
Now, Shannon, apart from external struggles, Prime Minister Muhyiddin is also facing mutiny internally within his coalition, Perikatan Nasional. In Johor, his Bersatu party has publicly clashed with UMNO over state government appointments. Bersatu has openly lobbied in recent weeks for more political appointments in Johor, but UMNO has responded by threatening to dissolve the state assembly and force a snap election. Why is UMNO so reluctant to work together with Bersatu to make PN work?
Well, I think you got to take a step back to look at why PN happened in the first place. We saw that a lot of elections where Pakatan Harapan was losing. No and PAS were doing really well in Malay majority seats. Now, if that were the case, and now that they've toppled Pakatan Harapan together with Bersatu, if you were to go into a general election, imagine a general election would happen today, tomorrow, whenever in the near future. Why would UMNO and PAS really need Bersatu's support? So as far as they're concerned, they can win an election, or at least most of the Malay majority seats, without having to share with Bersatu. So I think that's why they're reluctant to say Bersatu is our partner. Then you would have to split up the spoils of victory, as it were. Instead, if you was just partnered with PAS, you can corner a lot more power for yourselves.
Shannon, now let's go back to Mr. Muhyiddin. Now, his Bersatu presidency is also being challenged by Kedah Chief Minister Muhyiddin Mahathir, the son of course, Tun Dr. Mahathir. Taking into account all these challenges we've discussed, how long is Mr. Muhyiddin expected to last as PM? And in the same vein, what is PN's longevity like?
Well, I think in Malaysian politics, you've seen so many things happen. Prime ministers being toppled when you least expected it. But I think the base case is still that Muhyiddin will survive this year. He's expended a lot of political capital to keep his allies happy. And just while we were waiting to go on air, there was an MP that was previously loyal to Mahathir, Mazli Malik, who's taken up a GLC position in the Muhyiddin government. So that looks like one defection over to Muhyiddin's side. So what we're seeing now is a lot of challenges to his authority. And we saw on Monday how 10 out of Malaysia's 13 states didn't want to fully relax the curbs, the movement control order as directed by the federal government, because they wanted to restart the economy. But quite a number of states, well, they felt that they have to protect the health of their citizens. So there is still that kind of political posturing that is going on. I'd still say that Muhyiddin is probably safe in the short term, but plenty can happen, right? I mean, we didn't think that Pakatan Harapan would suddenly topple 21 months in. We knew there was trouble, but we didn't think that it happened so soon.
Now, Shannon, touching on the coronavirus situation in Malaysia, just to run up our discussion today, what is the latest update there? There was also a petition going around against Mr. Muhyiddin's decision right after his announcement of the easing.
Well, right after he announced, that was on a Friday. We can go back into the timeline, May 1st on Labor Day, right? And across that weekend, on Saturday, on Sunday, the petition gained a lot of steam. And I think by Sunday morning, there were over 420,000 signatures. And I think that a lot of the states took this as a sign that people didn't want the curbs to be relaxed. And so many states, all the opposition states, obviously, but alarmingly also 5 out of 8 PN states, which are in Muhyiddin's coalition, also decided not to fully implement. Some eased a bit. Some said that they would have to study what are the necessary guidelines and standard operating procedures. Some said they would not implement it at all. Some said they had to go back to their state governments and discuss how to do it. So a lot of different input, and some might say that the decision was a bit rushed. There wasn't enough feedback. There wasn't enough consultation that was going on. But I'll tell you what, even though the federal government says that you have to do it and they're insisting that you have to, it's not like businesses are rushing to reopen. Here in Kuala Lumpur, there is no state government, so they abide by the federal government decision. But it's not that all shops have reopened, that people are bursting open the doors and there are long queues everywhere. I think a lot of businesses, they are looking at the new guidelines, the social distancing. If you're a restaurant, the tables have to be 2 meters apart. You need to get all foreign workers tested first before they can come back to work. They're looking at these obstacles, and maybe they're thinking about taking their time, making sure they've got everything right. They don't want to fall foul of the law, lose their licenses, and also they don't want to open business and incur all the costs when possibly your potential for revenue is a bit lower. Maybe a lot of people still don't want to come out and go shopping. For example, the shopping malls are full. So it is, despite the government easing, it's still kind of a soft landing. There hasn't been a rush of people onto the streets or anything. Traffic's still pretty good here in Kuala Lumpur.
Well, thank you, Shannon.
Thank you very much.
We were speaking to Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh on the political struggles faced by Malaysia Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin and his coalition, Perikatan Nasional.
Most Singaporeans would have ordered food delivery during the current circuit breaker, but how many have thought of hitting the streets as a food delivery rider themselves? Now, Mr. Anthony Houlahan, Vice President of Strategy for telecommunications company Ericsson Telecommunications, signed up to be a GrabFood rider after hearing about the circuit breaker extension.
His mission to raise $100,000 for the Children's Cancer Foundation by the end of the circuit breaker period, whenever that might be. We're very pleased to be joined by none other than Anthony himself to talk about his experience as well as his cause. Welcome, Anthony. Anthony, first off, how did the idea of signing up to be a food delivery rider come about in the first place? Why not some other form of donating?
Okay, well, I think fundamentally the circuit breaker has just given someone like myself a lot of free time. I mean, I would typically spend my time at the gym, doing yoga, meeting friends, socializing. All of those things now are no longer available in the circuit breaker. So I needed to get active. I needed to get out of my house. I needed to interact with other people. So I felt doing the Grab food delivery or being a food delivery driver would be, a great way to do that, to be out and about and be in society and play a role. And then I kind of figured if I combine that with doing something for children in need, which is an important cause for me, that would be perfect. So that's where it all came from.
How's your experience been so far? Now, we understand you deliver after your regular day job. How were the first couple of days like? Was it difficult to get used to it?
Yes, yeah, I mean, it was. It's a new job for me, and I think like anything new, it needs to be learned. I'm delivering mainly in the area in which I live, so I have a pretty good idea of where things are, but learning how to use the app, technology, being in the right place at the right time, dealing with, the security measures, both in malls and restaurants, as well as condominiums, takes some getting used to. And there was a lot to learn in the early days.
Right. Now, Anthony, what's a typical delivery schedule like for you?
So in weekdays, I typically start after 5 p.m. and work through till about 8. And I'll turn on the app and I'll typically get jobs near where I live in River Valley, and I'll just work from there. And on the weekends, I do the same thing, but I'll start in the morning around 10 or 11 a.m. I go through until 7 or 8 p.m. On a weekend doing the same thing.
Now, Anthony, of course, this is not just fun and games. It is for a good cause as well. Now, you aim to raise $100,000 for the Children's Cancer Foundation. How has the progress been so far? Are you close to your target?
Yeah, we're making great progress. We're just coming short of the halfway mark in terms of the time. I've gotten to the 1st of June, which is the date that, the circuit breaker is scheduled to be eased quite a bit. We're on 27,000 as of the end of day yesterday, and making great progress. So I'm looking for some contributions now from some corporations who are, obviously associated with what I'm doing, as well as the greater public and friends of friends. So we're quite hopeful we can get there together.
Now, Anthony, you've been doing this for a while now. Any significant or memorable milestones to share from your delivery experience so far?
Yeah, I think two main things. I think the first one is the very touching messages I've received from the relatives and family members who've had relatives who've been cared for and supported by the Children's Cancer Foundation. People have shared their personal stories with me, and it's been incredibly touching to hear, kind of the impact the CCF has had on people's lives who are close to people who are suffering from cancer. That was amazing. And I think the second thing is the respect I have from the people who do this job day in, day out. Delivering food as a rider is not an easy job. It's hot out there. It can be quite brutal at times. It can be quite lonely even. Between your calls, you have to pedal hard. It requires a lot of physical effort, and for a fairly low wage, if I'm really honest. You know what I mean? So those guys work hard, and I've got so much respect for those guys who do this week in, week out to earn money, for themselves and their families.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for taking the time to speak with us. We certainly wish you all the very best in your endeavour. Now, we've been speaking to Anthony Houlahan, who has embarked on a mission to raise $100,000 for the Children's Cancer Foundation after signing up to be a food delivery rider. Now, you can read the full story on straitstimes.com.
And those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, log on to straitstimes.com. And once again, I'm Dylan Ang with Hurry Until Demand. Have a good weekend and join us on Monday for more stories on The Big Story.